We pulling?
What's up, it's Jimfro, and this is our updated guide for Neltharion. Big thank you to our supporters on Patreon. Your support means the world to us, and it's what makes these videos possible. Neltharion is a 3-phase single target fight, and you'll be saving Bloodlust for phase 3. So the first thing to know about this boss is his unique mechanic, the walls. He spawns a bunch of rock walls at the beginning of each phase, and they're in different patterns for each phase. You can use a couple of different mechanics to break through the walls, and each phase gives you a different reason to want to do that. Since the boss also frequently rebuilds any of the broken walls, a lot of the fight hinges on breaking the right walls at the right time. Now let's get into the phases. In phase 1, you get this wall pattern with a sort of circle in the middle and 5 big sections around it. On pull, we suggest bringing the boss over to one of the side sections where your ranged can already be standing. When a few players get a purple mark on their head, the boss is about to knock them away from him, and if they touch a rock wall while flying through the air, that part of the wall gets broken, which you don't want because you'll get unnecessary stacks of a dot for each wall you break. The boss does damage to anyone in between the boss and the targeted player, so don't be in front of anyone with the purple debuff. When a few players get an orange circle around them, they need to spread out because it explodes after a few seconds, doing a crazy amount of damage and applying a dot to anyone else in the circle. For the tanks, when the boss is casting Calamitous Strikes, the current tank is about to get knocked back, so they need to position themselves to get knocked back into a rock wall on the way to another section on the outside of the room. And then the off tank should immediately taunt after the cast because it leaves a big physical vulnerability on the tank. There's always a couple of seconds left on the debuff when taunt swapping, so make sure to use a defensive just to be safe. You definitely want to make sure to break a wall with this mechanic because of what comes right after this cast. The boss starts casting Echo and Fissure, which puts a big circle on the ground where the current tank is standing that explodes when the cast finishes, one-shotting anyone inside of it, doing raid-wide damage, and spawning a bunch of swirlies to dodge. It leaves a big pool of lava on the ground too, so it's best to move to a new section whenever this is cast. The raid-wide damage part increases a lot with every cast, so healers need to make sure that the raid is healthy on the later ones. When the boss gets to 60% health, he despawns all of the current walls and channels raid-wide damage while the new wall pattern spawns starting phase 2. In phase 2, 3 caster ads spawn, 1 in each section of the room, and you need to kill all 3 ads in order to get the boss past 35% health and start phase 3. So make sure the entire raid is in the same section as phase 2 is starting, and put all of your damage into that ad, staying in that section until it's dead. Each ad spawns with a big shield, and when the shield is broken, it pulses raid damage until it's dead, so make sure to finish them off before moving on to the next ad. On Heroic, it's a little more complicated because the ads are completely untargetable until their shield is broken. To do that, the boss selects a few players at a time who can attack the shielded ads. However, these players also become hostile to allies, so the raid has to be careful about not cleaving them down. Just keep the boss away from the ad while it's untargetable, and that should help out a lot. There's still the same orange circles on random players that everyone needs to avoid, and there's the same purple marks on random players that get knocked back breaking any walls. You can use these to break walls towards the next ad section when the current ad is getting low, or you can use the new tank mechanic. When the boss casts Sunder Shadow, it hits the tank for a ton of physical damage and gives the tank control of a shadow version of themselves for a couple seconds. The shadow version tank can now move through walls until the boss finishes his follow-up cast, Shadow Strike, which does more physical damage and straight up throws the tank's regular body to where the shadow version is, breaking any walls along the way. This also applies a big vulnerability debuff, so the off tank should taunt after the follow-up cast. This is probably the preferable way to break the walls you need to break, but either way works. The final thing about this phase is that the boss occasionally casts Umbral Annihilation, which is a raid-wide explosion that increases in damage a lot every time it's cast. This is the main thing that makes you want to get out of this phase quickly. Once you kill all of the ads, the boss starts phase 3, where he spawns a ton of walls in a weird pattern. So make sure everyone is toward the outside of the room near the boss so they don't get cut off, which happens more than you'd think. The main thing to focus on in this phase is surviving his raid-wide one-shot cast, Ebon Destruction. The only way to survive it is by standing in portals that the boss spawns, and he spawns the portals by consuming nearby rock walls. So keep the boss near some of the rock walls so that he can spawn portals, and when he casts Ebon Destruction, everyone needs to move into a portal to avoid the damage. Being in a portal when this cast goes off also makes the portals despawn, so you'll need to move the boss around the room to new portals each time they spawn. And the portals also spawn little melee ads, so try not to have more portals up than you need. The 2 knockback mechanics from phase 1 are also in this phase, but you actually don't want to break any walls in this phase, so try not to get knocked back into any. And the tanks will have to tank the boss and the ads while they have the vulnerability debuff from taunt swapping, so they definitely need to use whatever defensives they have available. The damage to the tanks in this phase is no joke. And that's pretty much it. Here's a quick recap of the fight for you to review or screenshot for later. Our Patreon supporters get these guides early, so if you're interested in that, check out the links below. Peace.